"Don't stop, I need this." Widow begs a haunted cowboy during a deadly winter storm. The storm came without warning, like a dark wall rolling across the open land. The sky, once pale and calm, turned heavy and gray. The wind began to cry through the empty plains, pushing snow into the air until the world looked like it was fading away. The cowboy felt it long before he saw it. His horse slowed, ears pulling back, legs shaking under the growing cold. The man pulled his coat tighter around his body, feeling the sharp bite of winter on his face. He had not planned to stop in this town. He rarely stopped anywhere. Moving was easier than staying. Riding forward kept his mind busy and his past quiet. But the storm did not care about his plans. The road vanished under thick white snow, and the wind grew so strong it nearly knocked him from the saddle. His horse struggled, slipping and breathing hard. The cowboy knew he had to find shelter soon, or risk losing everything. Through the swirling snow he saw a faint shape ahead. A few wooden buildings stood close together, their roofs already buried. This was the town. Small, quiet, almost forgotten by the world. He guided his horse down the main street, where doors were shut tight and windows were dark. No one walked outside. Even the animals were hidden. The cowboy stopped in front of the general store, but it was closed. He knocked once, then again. No answer. He tried another door. Still nothing. The storm grew louder, the wind screaming like a wild thing. His fingers went numb, and his breath came out in thick clouds. That was when he saw the light. It was weak, just a small glow coming from a cabin at the far end of the street. The cabin stood alone, away from the rest of the town, like it had been pushed aside. The cowboy felt a strange pull toward it, like the storm itself was guiding him there. He led his horse through deep snow until he reached the door. He hesitated. Knocking meant stepping into someone else's life. Even for a moment, he did not like doing that. He had learned that when people got close, things went wrong. Still, the cold did not wait for his thoughts. He raised his hand and knocked. Inside the cabin, the widow sat near the small fire, staring into the flames. The wind rattled the windows, and the walls creaked under the storm's force. She had lived through many winters, but this one felt different. Stronger, meaner. Her hands shook as she held her cup. The warmth not enough to chase away the chill in her bones. She had been alone since her husband passed. The silence in the cabin had become her daily companion. Some days it felt safe. Other days it felt like a heavy weight pressing on her chest. When she heard the knock, her heart jumped. No one came to her cabin. She stood slowly, listening. Another knock came, louder this time. The widow took a deep breath and walked to the door. She opened it, just a little. A man stood there, tall and tired, his face covered in snow and shadow. His eyes were dark, like they held too many memories. A horse waited behind him, head low, body shaking. "Please," he said, his voice rough from the cold. "The storm is too strong. I need shelter." The widow studied him. She had learned to be careful. Life had taught her that kindness could be dangerous. But she also saw the way the cold had reached into his bones. She opened the door wider. "Come in," she said softly. The warmth of the cabin wrapped around the cowboy as he stepped inside. The fire popped and cracked, filling the room with a gentle sound. He removed his hat, snow falling to the floor. The widow closed the door behind him, locking out the storm. For a moment, they stood there, two strangers in a small room, unsure of what to say. The widow pointed to a chair near the fire. "Sit. You look frozen." He nodded and sat, holding his hands out toward the flames. The warmth hurt at first, like needles in his skin, but he welcomed it. His shoulders slowly relaxed. "I'm grateful," he said. "Didn't think I'd make it much farther." The widow poured him a cup of warm drink and handed it to him. "Storms like this don't show mercy." He took the cup, their fingers brushing for just a second. Both pulled back, surprised by the small connection. Outside, the wind howled louder, as if angry at being shut out. They spoke little at first. The fire did most of the talking. The widow watched the cowboy from across the room, noticing the way he kept his eyes low, like he was afraid to meet hers for too long. She saw the lines on his face, the kind that came from more than just age, from loss, from long roads and lonely nights. "You traveling far?" she asked. "Far enough," he replied. She nodded, understanding without knowing why. She told him her name. He told her his. The names felt small in the heavy air, but they were something. A start. The storm hit harder, snow slamming against the windows like thrown stones. The cabin shook, and the widow's heart beat faster. She moved closer to the fire. "It won't stop tonight," she said. "You'll have to stay." He looked at her, surprised, then nodded. "I won't be in your way. I can sleep by the door."
She shook her head. "You'll freeze. There's a spare blanket."
She handed it to him, and he took it carefully, like he was afraid to tear it. As the night deepened, the storm trapped them together. The world outside disappeared, leaving only the cabin, the fire, and the quiet sound of breathing. The widow sat back down, staring into the flames. The light danced across her face, showing both strength and tiredness. The cowboy watched her, noticing how she held herself like someone who had learned to stand alone for a long time. "My husband used to sit there," she said suddenly, pointing to the chair across from her. The cowboy stiffened, unsure if he should respond. "He passed last winter," she continued. "Storm took him on the road. Never came back." The words fell heavy in the room. "I'm sorry," the cowboy said quietly. She nodded, eyes still on the fire. "So am I." Silence filled the space again, but it felt different now. Not empty, full. The cowboy stared at the floor, his jaw tight. "I lost someone too," he said after a long moment. She looked up at him. "Do you want to talk about it?" He hesitated. The past pressed against his chest, trying to stay hidden.
"Maybe another time." She did not push. She understood that some stories needed time.
The wind screamed outside, but inside, a fire held strong. The widow stood and added another log to the flames. Sparks flew up, lighting the room for just a moment. In that light, the cowboy saw her eyes shine with both pain and hope. She saw his eyes soften just a little. They sat there, two lives brought together by a storm neither of them had asked for. The night stretched on, long and cold, but the cabin stayed warm. As the fire burned lower, the widow wrapped her shawl tighter around herself. The cowboy noticed and placed part of the blanket over her shoulders. She looked at him, surprised. "Thank you." He nodded. "No one should be cold in a storm like this." The words stayed between them, simple but deep. Outside, the storm continued its wild dance. Inside, something quiet began to grow. Not loud, not fast, just a small feeling of being less alone in a world that often felt too big and too cold. The night was far from over, and the storm still had its hold on them. But for the first time in a long while, both the widow and the haunted cowboy felt that maybe, just maybe, this winter night was not only about survival, it was about finding a small light in the middle of the darkness. The morning did not come with sunlight. It came with more wind, more snow, and a sky that stayed the same dull gray. The widow woke first. The fire had burned low during the night, leaving only soft red embers. The cabin felt colder than before. She sat up slowly, listening to the storm. The sound of the wind was steady and strong, like it had no plan to leave. She looked across the room and saw the cowboy still asleep near the door. The blanket was pulled up to his chest, and his hat rested on the floor beside him. His face looked calmer in sleep, younger, less weighed down by whatever memories followed him on the road. She stood and moved quietly so she would not wake him. Her feet touched the cold floor, and she pulled her shawl tighter. She added a small piece of wood to the fire and waited for the flames to grow. The light filled the room again, slow and warm. The smell of simple food soon followed. She had little, but she shared what she had. The cowboy woke to the sound of movement and the gentle crackle of the fire. "Morning," he said softly, sitting up. She smiled a little. "If you can call it that?" He looked at the window, still covered in frost and snow. "Storm still there?" She nodded. "Stronger than last night." He stood and stretched, then walked to the window and wiped a small, clear spot with his hand. Outside, the world was white and moving. Snow danced in the air, and the sky seemed to press down on the land. "Looks like I'm staying another day," he said. She handed him a cup of warm drink. "Looks that way." They sat near the fire again, eating slowly. The quiet felt easier now, not heavy like before, more like a shared space they both respected. The widow watched the cowboy as he ate. He moved carefully, like someone who had learned not to take anything for granted. She wondered where he had come from and where he had planned to go before the storm changed his path. "Do you always travel alone?" she asked. He nodded, most of the time. "Doesn't it get lonely?" he thought for a moment. "Sometimes, but it's easier than staying in one place too long." She studied his face. Easier for who? He did not answer right away. He stared into his cup.
"For everyone." The wind outside grew louder, hitting the walls of the cabin. The widow stood and checked the door, making sure it was still tight.
The storm did not seem to like being kept out. "I used to be afraid of storms," she said, coming back to her chair. "My husband would say they were just the sky talking too loud." The cowboy smiled slightly. "Sounds like a good man." She nodded. He was. Silence followed, but it was gentle. Later, the widow noticed the cowboy's horse through the window, standing in the small shelter beside the cabin. The animal looked tired and cold. "Your horse needs more cover," she said. He stood quickly. "You're right." They both pulled on their coats and stepped outside. The cold hit them hard, like a wall. The wind tried to push them back inside. Together they walked through the deep snow to the small shelter. The cowboy checked the rope and added more hay, while the widow held the door steady against the wind. Their hands moved fast, working together without many words. The storm made talking hard anyway. When they finished, they hurried back inside, laughing softly as the snow followed them in. The cabin felt warmer than before. They sat down again, breath coming out in small clouds, until the heat of the fire reached them. "That storm almost took my horse last winter," the widow said. "He was my husband's. I couldn't let it take him too." The cowboy looked at her with respect.
You're stronger than you think.
She shook her head.
I didn't feel strong.
"I just didn't want to lose one more thing." He understood that feeling well. As the day went on, they began to talk more, not about the past, not about the pain, about small things, favorite places to ride, simple meals they enjoyed. Stories from the road that did not carry too much weight. The widow laughed at one of his stories, a real laugh that surprised both of them. The sound filled the cabin, bright and warm. He paused, then smiled. Haven't heard that sound in a while. She looked down, a little shy. Me neither. The storm showed no signs of stopping. The light outside faded, even though it was still early. The sky darkened again, turning the day into another long night. The widow stood and lit a small lamp. The soft glow filled the corners of the room. "Seems like the world is shrinking to this little cabin," she said. The cowboy looked around. Maybe that's not such a bad thing. She studied him, seeing the truth in his words. As night fell, the wind changed its song. It was lower now, slower, but still strong. The widow felt a familiar tightness in her chest. The storm always brought back memories of the night she lost her husband. The cowboy noticed her hand shaking. "You okay?" he asked. She took a deep breath. Some nights are harder than others. He nodded. "I know that feeling." They sat close to the fire, the warmth between them. He did not reach out. He did not speak. He just stayed there, steady and quiet. After a long moment, she spoke. "Thank you for staying." He looked at her. "I didn't have much choice." She smiled gently. "You always have a choice." The words stayed with him. Outside, the storm kept its hold on the land. Inside, two people who had learned to live alone were slowly learning how to share the space between them. The night stretched on, but it did not feel as cold as the one before. The fire burned steady, and so did the small growing trust in the room. The third night came slowly, like the storm itself did not want to let go of the land. The sky stayed dark even before the sun had fully set. The wind outside was not as loud as before, but it still moved through the trees and over the snow, whispering instead of shouting. The cabin felt small, but it also felt like a shield against the world. The widow sat near the fire, sewing a small tear in one of her blankets. Her hands moved with quiet care. The cowboy sat across from her, cleaning a small tool he kept in his pocket. Neither spoke for a long time. The silence was not uncomfortable. It was full of thought. The fire crackled, sending soft sparks into the air. The light danced on the walls, making shadows move like slow waves. The widow finally broke the quiet. "The storm is easing," she said. "I can feel it." He nodded. "Yeah." The wind changed. "Ah." She looked at him. "Does that mean you'll leave tomorrow?" The question came out softer than she meant. Tried to hide it by focusing on her sewing. He paused. His hands stopped moving. "I don't know," he said truthfully. She did not look up, but she heard the weight in his voice. They both knew this moment would come. The storm had been the reason they were together. When it ended, so would their shared space. The widow set her sewing down. "You don't have to decide now." He gave a small smile. "I've been deciding my whole life." She studied him, really looking this time. The tired lines on his face. The way his eyes always seemed to be watching something far away, even when he was sitting right in front of her. "You run from something?" she said gently. He looked at the fire. "Baby?" She leaned back in her chair.
"I used to think I was standing still. Turns out I was running too."
Just in a different way. He turned to her. "From what?" She took a deep breath. "From living?" The words surprised even her. She had not planned to say them. After her husband passed, she had done what she had to do to survive. She kept the cabin standing. She fed herself and the horse. She made it through each day, but she had stopped dreaming, stopped hoping. She had built walls around her heart and called it safety. The cowboy listened, not interrupting. I told myself being alone was easier, she continued, that I didn't need anyone. But nights like this, she looked around the cabin. They remind me how quiet the world can be. He understood that too well. The fire burned lower. He stood and added another log. The flames rose again, bright and warm. He sat back down, closer this time. I didn't always travel alone, he said. She looked at him, surprised. There was a woman, he continued, and a small place we called home. I thought I was done with the road. The widow waited, letting him find his words. One night trouble came to our door, he said. I was supposed to protect them. I thought I could handle it. His hands clenched. I couldn't, he finished. The room felt still, like even the fire was listening. She didn't make it, he said quietly. And I left. I couldn't stay in a place that held her memory in every corner. The widow felt her chest tighten. She knew that pain, the kind that filled every room and followed you even when you closed your eyes.
You didn't run, she said.
You survived. He shook his head. Some days I'm not sure there's a difference. She reached out without thinking and placed her hand near his on the table, not touching, but close enough to feel the warmth. Staying can hurt too, she said. Every day I wake up and remember he's not here. But I stay anyway. He looked at her hand, then at her face.
How do you do it? She smiled sadly. Some days I don't.
Some days I just breathe and wait for the night to pass. The wind outside picked up for a moment, rattling the windows. The cowboy finally placed his hand over hers. The touch was light, careful, like he was afraid to break something fragile. The widow did not pull away. They sat like that, two people holding on to each other in a quiet, simple way. Later, the widow stood and walked to the window. She wiped away the frost and looked out. The snow had slowed. The land was still white, but calmer. It's almost over, she said. He joined her at the window. Looks like it. They stood side by side, watching the world slowly return. The widow thought about tomorrow, about waking up to an empty cabin again. The thought made her chest feel heavy. You don't have to leave right away, she said, trying to sound casual. He smiled softly. You don't make it easy to go, she laughed, a quiet sound. Good. They went back to the fire. The night felt different now, not just a waiting space, but a turning point. The widow prepared a simple meal, and they ate together, sharing stories that were lighter than before. Childhood memories, small moments from the road, things that did not carry so much pain. The cowboy found himself laughing again. It felt strange, like using a part of himself he had forgotten. As the night grew deeper, the widow grew tired. The long days and cold had taken their toll. You should rest, he said. She nodded.
You too. They arranged their blankets, giving each other space but staying close to the warmth of the fire.
The widow lay down, staring at the ceiling. The shadows moved slowly above her. Thank you, she said quietly. For what? He asked. For not being afraid of my quiet. He smiled in the dark. Thank you for not being afraid of my past. Outside, the storm finally began to fade. The wind softened, and the snow fell gently, like the world was being covered in a clean new layer. Inside the cabin, two hearts that had been broken in different ways found a small, steady peace. They did not know what tomorrow would bring. They only knew that this night, this moment, mattered. The morning came quietly this time. No strong wind, no loud snow against the walls. just a soft light slipping through the window, pale and calm. The widow opened her eyes and listened. For the first time in days, she could hear something other than the storm. The world outside felt still, like it was holding its breath. She sat up slowly and looked across the room. The cowboy was already awake, standing near the door, pulling on his coat. He paused when he saw her. "Looks like the storm finally let go," he said. She smiled, but her chest felt tight. "Looks like it." They both knew what that meant. The fire had burned down to glowing pieces of wood. The cabin felt cooler, but not cold. The widow stood and added another log, more out of habit than need. The flames rose, bright and warm, like they did not want the quiet morning to feel too empty. They ate together again, slower than usual. Neither rushed, neither talked much. The silence this time was not gentle. It was full of things they did not know how to say. After breakfast, the cowboy stepped outside to check his horse. The widow watched from the doorway. The snow covered everything in a smooth white blanket. The sky was pale blue, like it had been washed clean. The cowboy brushed snow from his horse's back and checked the rope. The animal seemed stronger now, breathing steady, eyes calm. "You're ready," the widow said from behind him. He nodded. "So is the road?" She wrapped her shawl tighter around herself. The cold bit her face, but she stayed there, watching him move. Every step he took felt like one step farther away. They walked together toward the small hill behind the cabin. At the top stood a simple wooden marker. It was her husband's resting place. The snow around it was untouched, clean and quiet. The widow stopped in front of it. The cowboy stood back, giving her space. She knelt and brushed snow away from the base of the marker. Her fingers moved slowly, carefully. "I come here after every storm," she said. "Feels like I need to make sure he's still here." The cowboy listened, hands in his pockets, eyes on the ground. "I used to talk to him," she continued. "Tell him about my day, about the horse, about the fire, about how quiet the nights get." She stood up and looked at the cowboy. "I stopped doing that for a while." He met her eyes. She shrugged. Talking to someone who can't answer. He thought about the woman he lost, about the way he still spoke her name in his head when the nights grew too long. "Sometimes," he said, "the answer isn't in the words. It's in the act of speaking." She smiled softly. "Maybe you're right." They stood there together, the cold air between them, the past and present mixing in the quiet space. The widow took a deep breath. "Thank you for coming with me." He nodded. "Thank you for letting me." They walked back to the cabin slowly. The sun climbed higher and the snow began to sparkle in the light. Inside, the widow began to clean, not because the cabin was dirty, but because her hands needed something to do. The cowboy watched her for a moment, then started helping without being asked. They worked side by side, moving chairs, shaking out blankets, wiping the small table. It felt simple, normal. The kind of thing people did when they shared a life, even for a short time. The widow stopped and leaned against the table. "You don't have to stay and help," he smiled. "I want to." That small word stayed with her. When the cabin was done, they sat again by the fire. The cowboy took off his hat and turned it in his hands. "I should go," he said. The widow nodded, even though every part of her wanted to say something else. "I don't stay in places," he continued. "Not long. I do. But this," he looked around the cabin, "this feels different." She waited. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do with that," he finished. She took a deep breath. Maybe you don't have to know right now. He looked at her. What if I stay? Her heart jumped. For how long? He shrugged. Long enough to see what happens when I stop running. The widow felt tears rise, but she smiled instead. The cabin could use another pair of hands. He laughed softly. I'm not very good at staying still. She stood and walked to him. Neither am I. They stood close, not touching, but close enough to feel each other's presence. The air between them felt warm, even with the door open to the cold. The cowboy finally spoke. I can help fix the fence out back and the roof by the shed. Looks like the storm did some damage. She nodded. The town could use help too. The road will be hard to clear. He smiled. Sounds like work. She smiled back. Sounds like a reason to stay. They went outside together. The town slowly came back to life. Doors opened. People stepped out, looking at the snow, talking quietly. The storm had left its mark on every building, every path. The cowboy picked up a shovel from near the cabin. The widow grabbed another. They began clearing the path in front of her door. A neighbor walked by and nodded at them. Good to see folks helping again. The widow felt a strange warmth in her chest, not from the fire, from the simple feeling of being part of something again. They worked through the morning. The cowboy's hands moved strong and steady. The widow kept pace, even when her arms grew tired. At one point she stopped and leaned on her shovel, breathing hard. You don't have to push yourself, he said. She shook her head. I want to feel tired for the right reasons. He understood. They shared water and quiet jokes. The road slowly appeared under the snow. The town looked less broken, less forgotten. As the sun reached its highest point, they sat on the steps of the cabin, watching their work. Feels good, he said. She nodded. Feels like living. The cowboy looked at her, really looked at her, in the full light of day. She saw him too, not as a stranger in a storm, but as a man standing in front of her, choosing to stay.
You still scared? He asked.
Yes, but I'm not letting that stop me anymore. He smiled. Maybe I can learn how to do that too. The day moved on, slow and steady. The storm was gone, but what it left behind was more than snow and broken fences. It had brought two broken paths together. As the light began to fade again, they stood in front of the cabin, side by side. Tomorrow, he said, I'll help with the rest of the town. She nodded. Tomorrow, I'll make enough food for both of us. He laughed. Sounds like a plan. They went back inside as the evening settled in. The fire burned bright once more. The cabin felt different now, not just a shelter, not just a place to survive. It felt like the start of something new. The last morning felt different from all the others. The light coming through the window was warm, not pale. The sky outside was clear and wide, stretching far across the land. The widow stood by the door and breathed in the fresh air. The cold was still there, but it was softer now, like winter was loosening its grip. The sound of the leather and the soft thud of his feet on the floor felt steady, calm. It did not feel like the sound of someone getting ready to leave. It felt like the sound of someone getting ready for the day. The widow turned and smiled. The world looks alive again. He walked to the door and stood beside her. So do you. She laughed quietly. Careful. I might start believing that. They stepped outside together. The town was already moving. People carried wood, fixed doors, and cleared the last piles of snow from the paths. Children's voices echoed between the buildings, bright and full of life. The storm had taken a lot, but it had also brought the town closer. The cowboy picked up a hammer from a neighbor who waved at him. "Roof on the old store still needs help," the man said. The cowboy nodded. "I'll take care of it." The widow watched him walk down the street, strong and steady. For the first time, she did not feel the familiar fear of being left behind. She felt something else instead. Trust. She went back inside and began to prepare food for the day. The simple work felt meaningful now. Every cup she filled, every piece of bread she set aside, felt like part of a life that was growing, not just surviving. Later she walked through the town, carrying warm food to those still working. She found the cowboy on the roof of the store, hammering in a loose board. "Careful up there," she called. He looked down and smiled. "I've been on worse." She handed him the food when he climbed down. They sat on a low wooden step and ate together, watching the town slowly heal. "You ever think about staying somewhere long enough to see things change?" she asked. He wiped his hands on his coat. "Never used to. Change felt like something I caused, not something I could help." She nodded. "Maybe now you can do both." He thought about that. The day moved on, filled with small tasks and quiet moments. The widow helped a neighbor mend a broken fence. The cowboy fixed a door that would not close right. They crossed paths often, sharing smiles, short words, and steady looks that said more than long talks ever could. As the sun began to lower, the town gathered near the center. Someone had started a small fire. People stood around it, warming their hands, talking about what they had lost and what they still had. The widow and the cowboy stood side by side. An older man spoke first. "We made it through another winter," he said. "Not all of us are still here, but we're still standing." The words carried weight. The widow felt them deep in her chest. The cowboy looked at her. "You standing?" She smiled. "I am now." That night, back in the cabin, the fire burned bright. The widow poured warm drinks, and they sat in their usual spots. The room felt familiar, like it had always been this way.
"You don't seem like a man in a hurry anymore," she said.
He leaned back in his chair. "Guess I found a place that feels worth slowing down for." She studied him. "And what makes it worth it?" He looked around the cabin, at the fire, at the simple table, at her. "People," he said. The widow felt her heart beat a little faster. She stood and added another log to the fire, letting the moment settle. Later, they stepped outside. The sky was clear and full of stars. The cold air was sharp, but the night felt gentle. The widow pointed up. "My husband used to say every star was a place someone called home." The cowboy followed her finger. "Maybe that means home isn't just one place." She nodded. "Maybe it's where you choose to stand." They stood there in silence, looking at the wide sky. The world felt big, but they did not feel small in it. The cowboy broke the quiet. "I don't know what the future looks like." She smiled. "Neither do I, but I know I don't want to face it alone." He turned to her. "Neither do I." They went back inside as the cold deepened. The fire welcomed them again. The widow lay down to rest, and the cowboy settled near the door, like he always did. But this time, the space between them felt different. It did not feel like distance. It felt like choice. As the night passed, the widow woke once and listened to the quiet. The storm was gone. The wind was still. The world outside rested. She thought about how the storm had brought a stranger to her door, how that stranger had become someone she trusted, someone who had helped her remember how to live, not just exist. The cowboy lay awake too, staring at the ceiling. He thought about the road he had traveled for so long, the places he had left behind. The way he had believed staying meant hurting. Now, staying felt like healing. The morning came with soft light again. The widow woke and found the cowboy already up, making a simple meal. She laughed. "Look at you, taking over my kitchen." He smiled. "Figured I should learn my way around if I'm going to be here a while." Her heart warmed at the words. They ate together, talking about the day ahead, about helping the town, about fixing the fence, about small plans that felt like big promises. After breakfast, they stepped outside. The road stretched out in front of the cabin, long and open. The cowboy looked at it for a moment, then he turned back. The widow saw the choice in his eyes. Not forced, not trapped. Chosen. They walked down the path together, not away from the world, but into it. The town greeted them with nods and smiles. The sun climbed higher, lighting up the snow until it shone. The storm had taken its toll, but it had also given something back. It had brought two broken stories together and turned them into one. As they worked side by side, the widow felt something she had not felt in a long time. Hope. The cowboy felt it too, in the steady rhythm of the hammer, in the warmth of shared laughter, in the simple truth of being needed and choosing to stay. By the end of the day, the town looked stronger. So did they. That evening, as the fire burned low and the stars rose again, they sat together in the quiet cabin.